Welcome. I'm Glen Anderson, producer and host of this TV series for the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. For almost 31 years, this TV series has explored a wide variety of issues related to peace, social and economic justice, the environment, and nonviolent social change. We especially provide opportunities for the public to hear voices and viewpoints that are rarely heard in mainstream media. This month, we will discuss a remedy for several of our nation's problems. This remedy is both creative and exciting. The remedy would reduce fossil fuel use and protect our environment, our climate, and our public health. It would create jobs and help local communities throughout our nation. This month's topic is Solutionary Rail. The website promoting it, www.solutionaryrail.org, describes it as a people-powered campaign to electrify America's railroads and open corridors to a clean energy future. I agree with that summary, and Solutionary Rail offers many more benefits, which we will discuss during this hour. Our guest is Bill Moyer. He is a key organizer of Solutionary Rail. People know him as the executive director of the Backbone campaign, which is based on Vashon Island in Puget Sound in Washington State. Bill is a very savvy organizer whom I've known and respected and worked with for a number of years. He thinks strategically. Bill and the Backbone campaign help people organize strategically smart movements for social change and creative activities that they refer to as artful activism. Welcome, Bill. I'm glad that you're here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
I'm honored to be on the program this last installment. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate the short video that you folks produced very skillfully to explain the great benefits of Solutionary Rail. In less than 4 minutes, this video makes a very strong case. Is there anything else we need to say before we watch it?
Just that everything that you see is a team effort, and I thank Joe Panzetta and Sarah Palm-Sticker for all the work they did to make this video possible.
Okay, well, let's watch the video, and then we'll come back and carry on with the conversation.
Great.
Thanks.
Solutionary Rail, a people-powered campaign to electrify America's railroads and open corridors to a clean energy future. Our vision is to electrify major rail corridors for faster, cleaner trains that provide a more reliable service for people and goods. We want to draw high-value cargo off of roads and back onto the tracks for highly efficient transportation and near-zero carbon emissions. And we envision opening rail corridors for the transmission of renewable energy, unlocking stranded wind and solar assets, which will not only power the trains, but also the communities they travel to. The United States has the largest economy in the world, yet its transportation infrastructure is overloaded, underfunded, and crumbling. Meanwhile, we are failing to provide solutions for the most pressing environmental and economic needs of the 21st century. The taxpayer-subsidized highway system built in the 1950s triggered an exodus of freight and passengers off of the trains and onto cars and trucks, accelerating the decline of U.S. railroads. Rail transport was forced to become increasingly dependent on moving cheap, heavy, and often dangerous payloads with longer, slower-moving trains making fewer stops, and abandoning regular service to the communities that they served. Now, ever smaller crews are forced to work without schedules, on call 24/7, which results in chronic fatigue that endangers workers and trackside communities. Meanwhile, semi-trucks clog ports, towns, and freeways, causing disproportionate wear and tear on our roads, killing thousands each year on freeways, and polluting the air with diesel exhaust. The rest of the world is overcoming these problems by electrifying their railroads. Many countries in Europe and Asia have made massive investments in publicly owned railroads that rapidly transport goods and people. Unlike national railroads of other countries, U.S. freight railroads are almost entirely owned and operated by private companies, maintaining their own tracks, unable and unwilling to make the large, long-time investments for electrification and track modification. Solutionary Rail addresses these challenges through a tax-exempt, not-for-profit Steel Interstate Development Authority, creating a public-private partnership with railroads and other stakeholders to finance, build, and operate the electrification and transmission infrastructure. Our vision champions the needs of numerous stakeholders. For rail workers, minimum crew sizes, set schedules, and improved working conditions. For passengers, decreased travel times through higher speed rail networks. For farmers, increased capacity for bulk commodities and faster, more reliable service for moving perishable crops to market. For tribes, right-of-way justice, energy sovereignty, and export opportunities. For trackside communities, reduced air pollution from diesel exhaust. For green energy developers and rural electric co-ops, new transmission opportunities and access to distant customers. For the railroad industry, increased market share of high-value freight and long-term vitality. And for rural communities, an opportunity for access, economic renewal, and cultural vibrance. Solutionary Rail is a people-powered campaign for sustainable transportation and a clean energy future. And now we need you to help move this people-powered campaign forward. Join the team. Learn more at solutionaryrail.org.
Well, Bill, people know the Backbone campaign because of the work you've done with kayaktivists and artful activism and all kinds of stuff. And people might be wondering, why Solutionary Rail? Is this some off-the-wall thing? How did you guys get into this?
Well, one of our previous conversations was around grand strategy. And so that, you'll notice that there's a lot of connections that are being made here with Solutionary Rail to create a very broad alliance. The other piece that I think is important is, as change agents, we can often get real bogged down in what we're against and forget to be championing what we're for. So I like to say that our no is only as powerful as our yes is compelling. That said, it was a surprise to get into this. It was not an inevitable path. And what happened was that we learned that Warren Buffett, the principal of Berkshire Hathaway, that owns BNSF Railroads, Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroads, we thought that he would be a likely sort of target for public ire in regards to using this beautiful place that we live as a corridor, a fossil fuel corridor to Asia. So we were trying to make a moral appeal.
For the coal trains and oil trains that we've been organizing against.
That's right. So we were working against the coal trains and the oil trains, because again, we're from this area. And we were about to launch a video series, Letters to Mr. Buffett, Dear Mr. Buffett letters. And I was approached by this rail, labor, and environmental activist, Jen Wallace, at an event. And Jen came up to me and some friends and said, you know, you all have more in common with railroad labor than you think in regards to Warren Buffett. And I said, really? And so she started to educate me, and she introduced me to some other folks. And then I was watching a panel on the coal train fight, and there was a guy on that panel named Mike Elliott. He's a part of the Locomotive and Trainmen Engineers Union. And afterwards, I was talking with him and saying, really, is this the best we can do with railroads, is to be this corridor for fossil fuel to Asia? And that conversation evolved, and into the place where about some months later, Mike said to me, in 2008, he had been part of the creation of a paper on modernizing the Northern Transcon, that rail line from Seattle to Chicago. And he said to me, why don't you see if your people can green it? And I think it's very important, if we're going to build a movement that reaches everyone, that we really take challenges by allies like labor and others seriously. And so I made sure that, so then I built a team of railroad experts, Steve Krismer, Amtrak's chief track geometry engineer who I'd met at Occupy DC, Rob Briggs, a local scientist and engineer and architect, and Alan Drake, world expert on rail electrification, Bruce McFarlane, an economist who had done a blog and wrote a lot of the material, came up with a lot of the interesting ideas that we represent through Solutionary Rail. And then I had a team of folks like Kathy Fulton, who helped with the layout, and Margot Boyer, who did incredible copy editing, and lead writer Patrick Mazza, who really took a lot of disparate elements and helped put them into an understandable format. So it was a big team, and then the great artist by J. Craig Thorpe. So it was a big team effort that actually resulted in this piece.
Well, show the people the book, because we'll be mentioning it later on and invite people to get a copy. It's $19.95. And we'll mention this again at the end of the program.
Yeah, and this artwork, we commissioned artist J. Craig Thorpe, who actually lives in Bellevue, to do the art. And he's one of the country's best rail artists. And he likes to talk about painting the possible.
Okay, so is there anything else we need to know about how Solutionary Rail came about?
No, we worked for a few years and on the concepts, and then it became clear that we needed to do a book, because the more I got into it, the more convinced I was that this was a really important yes for the people who were doing the protests, locking down to tracks, etc. We needed to be able to say, what are we for, and how can we use the rails in a way that serves everybody?
Yeah, and we've done some of our previous programs in this series about coal trains, oil trains, the thin green line that protects our region from fossil fuel exports to Asia. So this is a great one to look at the remedies.
Yeah.
I'm hoping people will want to watch that video again that we just saw. It's amazingly well done and informative in less than 4 minutes. It's at solutionaryrail.org/SR video.
That's right.
That's great thing. The video mentioned that since the middle of the 1900s, there's been a major shift from freight hauled on railroads to freight hauling on big trucks. What problems have you seen in truck-based freight? What problems does that cause?
Well, when we built the interstate system, we built a publicly subsidized transportation system that was immediately in competition, like the video says, with the existing railroads that are privately owned. Trucks are less aerodynamic. They're far less efficient. Someone says that the rubber on the road is the size of $1, and the wheel on the track is the size of a dime. So there's a lot of efficiency of getting things, keeping things on a track rather than on the railroads. The other thing is with the consolidation of the railroads, as people and goods fled the rails to go to trucks and cars, the railroad industry got more and more dependent upon moving heavy commodities, longer trains, and then they abandoned schedules. And so shippers who need to get something from the port to the marketplace, or from the factory to the port on a schedule, it's hard for them to rely on the trains any longer. Trains now actually only carry 3.5% of the value of freight in this country, where trucks carry 70% of the value. Trains carry, a much larger part of the weight. They carry 28% of the ton miles. Well, but it's very cheap, heavy stuff that's traveling on the rails, and yet all of our valuable freight is moving on trucks and then some on planes. The trucks. Oh, and then the other piece is that stuff isn't even getting onto the trains unless it's going a minimum of 300, 500, even sometimes 750 miles. So that means that sometimes things are traveling to a hub like Kansas City and then having to backtrack on a truck. Well, that's also terribly inefficient. So the whole system's really screwed up. The whole business model of rail is screwed up. And as we move away from coal, and as we start to slow down and not allow bomb trains rolling through our communities, it's going to be really important that the railroad industry shift what's traveling on the tracks.
And you mentioned just a moment ago in this thing that you're saying about local communities you don't have reliable schedules, and well, I either heard or inferred that I know that there are communities that are not served by rail. The trains don't stop there. Lots of passenger stations are closed down. A lot of places that could use freight stops, they don't go there, and so you end up with trucks because the rails are not serving the people.
Oh, it's in 1928 in Washington State, the train stopped at every town. Mm-hmm. You know, just imagine for localization of our economy, for building strong production and localized agriculture, all those things, they rely on getting things to market. Yeah. Now, if you, one of the things that trucks do, of course, is a great deal of harm through the diesel exhaust. And so, Solutionary Rail isn't just about electrifying the railroads and electrifying the trains. We also need to electrify the trucks, but we can't do that if they have to travel 500 miles.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of trucks, after they've dropped off their load, they go home empty.
Yeah,
that's a waste. I mean, it's just full of waste in the system. One of the things that I mean, every time you think about some other aspect of Solutionary Rail, you think, well, here's another problem that it's solving. There are just so many solutions that this offers to so many of the problems that people sometimes don't even pay attention to the problems because we're used to them.
Well, because it's a really important time right now. We have very little time to decarbonize our economy, and decarbonizing freight and decarbonizing transportation is a huge part of that. 20% of the greenhouse gas emissions nationally come from the transportation sector. A lot of that is like 65% is approximately is light duty vehicles like cars, but a good deal of that is trucks. And the trains are relatively small portion in terms of greenhouse gases. So it's by electrifying and speeding up and giving regular service, returning service to communities with shorter, more faster, more regular trains, we can stimulate local economies, and we can also get rid of the really dirty aspects of shipping from the trucks that are polluting communities and giving people asthma and such. And instead, we can start to then electrify, decarbonize the trucks that are picking stuff up from the trains, because we can make the trip that they take much shorter.
Yeah. The website for Solutionary Rail, solutionaryrail.org, explains how it would improve the economics of railroad business. I want to follow up on that. Several parts of that Solutionary Rail website have points I want us to check in on. So the website there about improving the economics of the railroad business says, Solutionary Rail proposes a strategy for shifting the economics of rail away from dependence on moving heavy fossil fuel commodities and freight for exclusively large shippers to diversified high-value freight. And you've mentioned that already.
Yeah.
It is our compelling, yes, and entirely doable vision that provides a win-win alternative to the boom and bust economics of ever-growing unit trains and coal and explosive oil. Anything else to comment on that?
Well, the trajectory has been for these trains, like it says, to get longer and longer, and for the crew sizes to get smaller and smaller. So this is impacting workers in a real negative way. The railroads which are such an important resource. They're so important that when I started looking at this and I realized that infrastructure was actually private, I was a little concerned. I think that really the nationalizing the rails would not be an unreasonable thing to do with the important level of that infrastructure. So I think they should not be quite so difficult in trying to do some of the improvements that we're asking.
And nationalizing, so people know the term, it means having the government take them over from the private sector to be public commodities, like we have so many other things that are public. We have public schools, we have the highways are owned by the public, lots of things, the fire department is owned by the public. And so nationalizing the rails would be having the railroads owned by the public, which makes perfect sense. A lot of cities have their own electric utilities, Seattle City Light, Tacoma City Light,
Yeah.
and so forth.
Yeah, they're a regulated monopoly, right? Because and in the United States. But the reason we're lagging behind is because most other places, the railroads are public. They're
Yeah.
publicly owned. So the
Yeah.
investment in that infrastructure doesn't have to be on the basis of that short-term ROI, return on investment, that private companies are looking for. And instead, we're thinking about that larger public good. I think Solutionary Rail is really trying to connect the dots on what are that variety of public goods that could be served through an electrified railroad system that's also functioning as a transmission corridor for renewable energy.
And we'll talk about that in just a moment.
Okay.
But I want to pick up one other angle here. People who care about the environment know that anytime a business or any kind of a system causes waste, that inefficiency hurts the environment. And our environment and our economy and our climate need a lot more efficiency in every part of our systems. And Solutionary Rail would be so much more efficient. And I appreciate what your website says. Solutionary Rail describes how track modernization, electrification, and transmission infrastructure could augment the private rail infrastructure to speed up and increase efficiency of freight and passenger rail in order to draw freight and people off highways and airplanes and back onto the tracks. Increased speed and capacity means better service to communities and producers all along the tracks.
Clearly.
And so the efficiency is something we need to be working for.
Right. And there's a couple things there. There's the efficiency of the metal on metal. There's also the efficiency of the trains are already currently are diesel electric trains. So they're generating electricity to run the trains on the train with diesel fuel. Well, as soon as you introduce the internal combustion engine, you're creating inefficiency there.
Yeah, and pollution.
And pollution. So the capacity to move those trains more cheaply by using electricity that's coming from an overhead line is another way that we gain efficiency. And you add that to then the ancillary or the domino effect of being able to electrify trucks, et cetera, and then pulling people off of and goods off of trucks and freeways and cars and getting them onto tracks. And you start to see, I think, a large benefit for the society.
Well, and I think anybody who drives on the freeways, the highways, the streets knows that these streets and highways and freeways are always being worn out, resurfaced, and it's these big heavy trucks that grossly, disproportionately wear out the freeways, the highways, and the streets.
Grossly, 5,000 to 1. 5,000 cars to do the impact of one truck.
Yeah, and so we end up paying for that inefficiency every time you're driving on a rutted freeway, or every time you have to be slowed down because they're resurfacing it yet again because the trucks have been wearing it out. And also, so it's a cost to our taxpayers as well as a cost to our time. So if we look at the complexities of the system, everything points to Solutionary Rail as a good remedy. I want to add something else here that's in your website. You would need to combine the efforts of government and private companies. So you're proposing a tax-exempt, not-for-profit Steel Interstate Development Authority, which you abbreviate SIDA, that would work with railroads and other stakeholders to issue tax-exempt bonds to finance, build, operate the electrification and the transmission infrastructure. Can you tell us about this necessary and really practical entity, the Steel Interstate Development Authority? And we're kind of tight on time, so if we can...
Yeah, sure. So this is one of those places where Bruce McFarlane's ideas and the folks from this other group that started before us, Rail Solutions and the Steel Interstate Coalition, informed Solutionary Rail. One of the problems with the private railroad companies putting in additional infrastructure is that those improvements on their property increase their tax burden. So we don't want to give a private bailout to the railroad companies, and we're not insisting on a nationalization of rail. So a middle ground is to create an interjurisdictional, like the collaboration of states, departments of transportation, and possibly tribes, to utilize their tax-exempt status to build, to finance, build, and operate these electrification infrastructure, transmission infrastructure on top of, like a public belt on top of the private railroad right-of-way. If that's adequate, yeah.
Yeah. So you would use the rail routes also as corridors for transmission of electric. So like major electric lines above the rails, overhead.
Yeah.
And the energy created by renewable resources. We've got a lot of sunlight in areas that don't have a lot of population. There's a lot of wide open spaces that get a lot of sunlight.
Yeah.
We could just as well be generating electricity there, put it into the wires, and it's right there. You don't need to haul it a long distance. And it'll transmit, and you can use it locally as the trains go through that area. And so it seems like there's yet another way of synergies and efficiencies that are all reinforcing. If the solar or wind is there as the rail line moves across the country,
why
sense.
not tap into it? And it's the NOAA study, folks like Sandy McDonald, who in 2016, January 2016, did a paper, how to get to 80% renewables by 2030. The key piece there was, yes, the pieces of distributed renewable energy in lots of different forms, but the really key piece was the computer put out a model of high voltage DC transmission, highly efficient transmission that doesn't lose a bunch of energy over hundreds of miles. And when you look at the density of the map that they proposed for transmission, it's very similar to the density of the map that the National Association of Rail Passengers uses around what their best idea for ideal service for the country. So utilizing the rail corridors as transmission corridors makes a bunch of sense, because the hardest thing about doing new transmission or doing new transportation or putting in a pipeline for that matter is the creation of the right-of-way.
Yes.
These rights-of-way exist already. And if we can leverage those, we can start to get to much more ambitious decarbonization goals. The 80% renewable of that NOAA study, or the 100% renewable by 2035 that's been proposed by Council of Mayors and also by Representative Tulsi Gabbard in Congress.
So we need to make sure that people who are working on the climate issues are going to get a link to this program, because we're all in this together.
Oh yeah,
we've got a major solution.
We cannot be trapped with just thinking, oh, the only thing we can talk about is carbon tax. The only thing we can talk about is cap and trade. The only thing we can talk about is rooftop solar. Okay, those things all may be important, but unless we have that transmission infrastructure, unless we can solve the problem of the dirty transportation system that we have, and not just for rich people who can afford to buy a Leaf or a Tesla, we need to be able to. I mean, the biggest employer in the United States is trucks. That's the biggest job opportunity in the U.S. Well, my goodness, I'm sure we'll get to that, but yeah.
So. One thing that we've mentioned a bit that I want to just reinforce here is that people know that our nation's infrastructure is in very poor condition. We need to rebuild a lot of infrastructure, and we've talked about the infrastructure that Solutionary Rail would provide. We have to watch out that we don't tap into Trump's notion of ripping off taxpayers in order to enrich big corporations that are in his pocket. So we don't want to have a corporate giveaway, and we also don't want to privatize new infrastructure. We need to keep the infrastructure as publicly owned so the public can manage it for the well-being of everybody and not rip off for privatize for a few. So Solutionary Rail's approach to a public-private thing is a very healthy approach, not like the corrupt stuff that we've been used to.
Yeah, this is a really important point. Folks think that, oh, they're proposing to do this for the railroad companies and as some sort of a bailout. Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. Actually, that's the danger. The danger is because this is happening all over the world, right? Ethiopia is building out its electrified rail. Switzerland's 100% electrified rail. I mean, we know this is where it's going. With the failure of the business model that the railroads are inevitably up against, the danger is that we get government doing this and giving, like, exempting the railroads from paying taxes. And then what's going to happen to those poor communities that are relying on those taxes? They're going to build out this infrastructure and give it to them? Heck no.
Yeah.
This needs to be publicly controlled. We can finance it. We don't have to use capital money to finance this infrastructure. The idea is that the Steel Interstate Development Authority would actually issue bonds, and it would leverage TIFIA loans on the federal level. So, and again, the public's okay with a long, 3 decades return on investment.
Yeah.
Not Wall Street isn't. So
Right.
we cannot leave this up to Wall Street.
Right, right, and the compelling case that we make, especially if we're concerned about the environment and the climate and other hard realities, really point to the inevitability of this, like you say, and it really makes a compelling case. And you mentioned other nations in their rates of electrical rain. Your website said that only website of the video said 1% of the rail in the United States is electric, but 30% of India's is electric, and 41% of China's, and 46% of Russia, 48% of Germany, 52% of France, 64% of Italy's, but only 1% of the U.S. We're becoming a backward nation, and as you said, Ethiopia is moving ahead. So we just need to know that Solutionary Rail would modernize this aspect of our railways, and we are being left behind, just like Trump is moving us into becoming a backward nation that goes back to the coal and oil era instead of moving ahead, and also wants to not trust science.
But honestly, I mean, really, Trump, that's rhetoric. That's not real. Nobody's going back to coal, and coal is not going to build jobs. We know that, right?
That's the rhetoric.
That's the rhetoric.
But he's being an obstacle to the progress that we need.
Absolutely.
And people believe it. I just read recently that a number of the coal miners who need to get retrained to become employable again are refusing to get retrained because they're waiting for Trump to bring back coal. So they're going to sit there in their communities in the coal country in Appalachia and get poorer and poorer and poorer, waiting for Trump to bring back coal. It's not going to happen. And he's lied to us, and we need to stop letting him lie to us, and we need to move ahead into a better future.
Well, I actually think that it's important to do a shout out for the labor leaders who know that this is true, to know that this is the false, that coal is not coming back, that the idea that jobs and the environment are in competition with each other is a false choice.
Yeah.
You know, Jeff Johnson has provided incredible leadership in the Washington State Labor Council. Steve Gary is an amazing guy who was head of the steel workers at March Point in Anacortes at the refinery when they were doing their strike. When Backbone Campaign and Solutionary Rail Project worked with Railroad Workers United on 2 conferences, one in Richmond, California, and one in Olympia, Washington. The keynotes at both of those were refinery workers, because nobody knows the dangers of the negligence of greedy fossil fuel industry and other corporate interests, as well as those blue collar workers, because they've actually lost friends. Railroad workers lose friends all the time. These people are actually our best allies, some of our best allies anyway, to making a just transition away from fossil fuel economy.
Yeah, and this is one of these things about Solutionary Rail I like so well. It's a win-win-win-win-win for all kinds of constituencies, for local communities, for farmers, for people who care about the environment, for workers. I mean, it's a win-win-win all the way around.
Peabody Coal hates it, though.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, and you know what? I don't care.
Yeah.
Like if there's one loser, it's Peabody Coal. Exactly.
They're bankrupt. So yeah. So during the conversation that we've had thus far, we've mentioned how this would be good for local communities and rural communities. This would be good for farmers. If we had these kinds of rail systems, they would stop in local communities, and farmers could get their crops loaded on right away and not have to haul it, like you say, to Kansas City or whatever. And so farmers would be better off. Is there anything else you want to say about railroad workers? You had mentioned them already.
Well, I mean, you're bringing us some good stuff. So there's the railroad workers, there's the farmers. You know, again, part of being stewards of the planet is an increased localization of agriculture, increased localization of manufacturing, and invigorating these rural communities. Getting the other piece is this relates to salmon runs and the Orca, the Snake River Dam. That dam system exists as much. Mostly because the farmers historically have had a hard time getting the guaranteed capacity they need to move their crops when they're ready to go to market. And so the railroads need to provide that capacity without squeezing, screwing, undermining the markets that the farmers are dealing with. The railroad workers, this is a very dangerous situation right now. Because the trains do not travel on a schedule, these people are on call 24/7, 365 days a year. That's a terrible way to live your life. And then the impact of that is that that chronic fatigue is systemic. You can't, and what do the railroad companies do? The railroad companies punish the workers. The workplace compliance. Their rules there. They're trying to force the workers to take responsibility for fatigue that's caused by their very system of not having schedules.
Yeah, and it's dangerous. I mean, the crews have fewer people working on the trains. So I've read about cases where accidents occur because, well, we used to have somebody here in the caboose, but we don't anymore. Or whatever. They're short-staffed, and if they're fatigued, they're operating a big piece of equipment at some fast speeds. You've got to have people who are awake and alert and adequately staffed. So
they deserve that.
That's for the workers and it's for the public. Everybody who drives across a railroad crossing, everybody who doesn't want your town to blow up from an explosive train.
Everybody deserves their railroad workers be treated well. And there's no doubt about it.
And truckers, you would think that truckers would say, "Oh no, we got to keep the current system," but you got some evidence also about how the people who work in the trucking industry are suffering from the current system.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of horror stories that I don't even know enough to tell you, but I've been hearing from truckers who are either in the system of drayage, where they're bringing cargo from ships to trains or to warehouses, etc. And they're sitting in trucks all day, sucking in diesel. They're underpaid. They're the most marginalized workers. Long haul trucking is something that most people don't want to get into. They can't recruit enough people for it. And then you can't, as organized labor, you'd think, oh, the Teamsters, they must be really against this. Well, the Teamsters actually only have about 10% of truckers, less than 10% of truckers organized. So they're not able to fight for their rights in that context. The truckers would be a lot better off if they could be truckers who could go home at night and be well rested and not suck up diesel all day. And they could be driving electrified trucks, and they could then be part of active labor that are actually fighting for their rights. And it's truckers have a lot to gain from rail electrification.
And there's another constituency we haven't mentioned much, and that's people who like to travel by rail. People like the American history of, taking a train trip someplace,
Yeah.
and that's been cut back in a whole bunch of ways. And I know rail passengers would benefit from this. We're tight on time. I want to run through a couple things. It seems like with so many reasons for this, that the economics and the other pressures should have lined up, and we should have already had Solutionary Rail by now. Why hasn't something like this happened already?
Well,
and we're tight on time.
Right. So we've already talked about the business model. We're dealing with some of the most unmovable industries, the transmission, the private railroad companies. I think people get into a rut and they fail to connect the dots. And a lot of people think that change happens from the top down, and so it's up to the people on top to decide. I completely disagree with that. I believe that it's when we have the tribes, the railroad workers, the farmers, the rural communities, the fence line communities who are choking on the diesel and their kids are suffering from asthma. It's when we have those folks in alliance with environmentalists and folks who are worried about climate coming together and demanding that this infrastructure be to better serve the society, and that then we're going to start to get our elected officials to have some backbone to actually stand up to these big industries.
Well, and we've made, I don't remember when I first heard about this. It's been a couple of years now, but it was exciting when I first heard about it, and the more I study up on it, the more exciting it is. And I just see great potential for this. So we need to organize a vibrant grassroots movement, as you described. And what strategies you have for building that movement? How can we move this thing ahead?
Yeah, it takes a lot of time, and that's why it's really important that you're doing what you're doing here and that we're doing this today, because we need folks in a lot of sectors of society to start telling the story. Mm-hmm. We need folks showing the video to people, and so what we've been doing so far is to build out coalitions, to organize organizations. Railroad Workers United was a first ally. Our labor allies at the Washington State Labor Council passed a resolution to Governor Inslee for feasibility study last summer of 2016. In 2017, May of 2017, the Sierra Club of Washington State passed a resolution to the governor for a feasibility study. That is starting to move out to other labor organizations around the country, other Sierra Club chapters around the country. We're working with the Moving Forward Network, which is a coalition of community-based organizations fighting against the impacts of intermodal freight on their communities. So moving into coalitions, having those coalitions understand the perspectives and the demands of each other. Mm-hmm. Because we have to go forward without throwing each other under the proverbial bus.
Right.
So building coalitions is a big part of it. Using the power of those coalitions to press government into the service of the public interest by doing the feasibility study, because we need to understand which parts of this track need to be sped up. Because we got to move that average speed of the train way up to that average speed of the truck. How are we going to do that most efficiently? And so we need states in each corridor to form these still interstate development authorities to work with the tribes that these pass through, because those tribes have a lot of historical interest in turning around the history of rail and transmission.
And ordinary people have memory too. A lot of us grew up in towns that used to have light rail. They had trolleys. The town where I grew up in, Everett, 30 miles north of Seattle, right through downtown, there were rails for the light rail system that existed close to a century ago, and that's been all paved over for cars and trucks and things. So a lot of us have history of electric rail systems, light rail, electric trolleys in the past, and that all got wiped out by the automobile industry and the tire and oil companies. So we need to recognize this is not a far-fetched thing. This is actually returning to our roots in some ways.
In many ways.
In many ways, and it's a safe thing. back to our roots also, where the trains stopped in every little town, as you said,
Yeah,
and so forth.
And you know, it wasn't just the trolleys that were electrified. The freight trains were electrified.
Yeah.
The freight trains were electrified to get over the Rockies and the Cascades.
And
The
Cascade, and through the tunnel.
Cascade
Highway
Tunnel.
2.
Yeah, in 1909, that was electrified as a safety precaution because of the fumes in the tunnel. In 1928, we had 759 miles of electrified rail in Washington State alone. So this is not a new thing. It was only in the 70s that we lost our last electrified freight, and it's time that we go back to that.
Yeah, yeah. The legislature for Washington State will convene on Monday, January 8, or whatever the second Monday of January is, of 2018. And I know you want something from the legislature to help move this ahead. Can you tell us briefly? We're quite tight on time.
Yeah, we need a feasibility study. We need to be able to solve the problems that a little scrappy group like Backbone can't solve and answer all the questions. We need the legislature, the Department of Transportation, and the Transportation Committee in the legislature, and the Governor Inslee to find a way to fund feasibility study. There's a team at Washington State University who could do a bunch of this. There are already lots of folks in Washington State who could help us answer the questions that need to be answered. So we need to push on folks in the Transportation Committee and people at the Governor's office, Governor Inslee himself, to support, to redirect some money so that we can do the work that needs to be done.
And that's for Washington State, where we happen to live.
Yep.
Other states all on the routes could replicate this. And I
Absolutely.
can imagine local communities would have the potential to say, geez, we need to find out what would this mean for our county here? What are the needs that we have in our county in whatever locations around the nation? You know, county by county basis, saying, geez, we need this so that our needs can get met as a local community. So there's a lot that could be done here. Any good proposal has to be aware of pitfalls and obstacles and distractions that could impair the progress that we need to make. Do you see any pitfalls, obstacles, or distractions that might slow down our progress for Solutionary Rail?
Well, I don't see. I think we've done really careful work. We worked for 3 years before we produced this book. I think what might happen is that other corridors move more quickly than the Northern Corridor. I think that in California, where they're already talking about decarbonizing freight, that route through Kansas City, Chicago is a really prime route. But I wouldn't be sad if that happened. I think if we leave it up to the private companies to figure it out, and that they'll let us down. I think it really has to be bottom up.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of the public officials who are always asking, well, what does BNSF think? What does BNSF think? They need the pressure and the backbone to actually tell BNSF what the people think.
Yes, yeah. So it's up to us to mobilize the constituency of the broad public interest. I've already mentioned the website, www.solutionaryrail.org. Yeah. And I hope people will visit that. There's a lot of good stuff there, including the video that we showed earlier in this program.
Right.
And people can watch that video again through the website. So www.solutionaryrail.org/SR video, and that'll take you right there. And you already held up the book. You can hold it up again. It's $19.95. I have not yet bought my copy, but I will. And but it's informative. I haven't bought it yet.
It's yours. Here you go. Here's your copy.
So and other ways for people to get informed.
Yeah. So I think that it's really easy to share the video. I think it makes it. We worked really hard on that for people to make that case. I think please, folks, share that video. We need folks to then share that video in the groups that they participate in, and there are PowerPoints that are available for folks who are doing presentations. Getting the book into local libraries.
I saw the PowerPoint that you provided when we were preparing for the program. Is very good.
Yeah, and it's available to anyone.
Yeah.
Getting the book into local libraries, passing resolutions in your organization, getting your state's department, your governors and your state's Department of Transportation working on this, becoming a champion. You know, anybody can do a presentation on Solutionary Rail.
Yeah, well, and people can get the link for this program through www.olympiafor.org, click TV programs, scroll down to December 2017, and there will be a link for watching it, and next to it will be a document that I will write up after tonight's taping, a very thorough summary of what you said during the time, so if somebody doesn't want to spend a whole hour watching it, they can read the summary of 10 pages or so, whatever it turns out to be, and get that information, and share that around, share the links around. Send them to your email list within your environmental group. Or
sign
your
the
climate
petition
group.
to Governor Inslee to pay attention and to show some leadership on this. And we don't. This is not Elon Musk hyperlink, hyperloop.
No.
This is doable.
Well, and this is century-old stuff.
Oh yeah,
this is easy.
The other thing that people think about, this regenerative braking on the Prius, as if that's something new. In 1915, GE built the first locomotive that was used that when it went down the hill, it put energy back into the wires. We've been doing regenerative braking. There's
for a
century. This is so doable.
Yeah.
This is not the Jetsons. This is now.
Yeah.
We can do this now,
Yeah.
and this is how we get to the future, because we need to bring rail back to the center of our society.
Yeah. So I'm hoping that people really will find all kinds of ways to connect, because we've talked about all the different kinds of constituencies, farmers and workers and local communities and small towns, and
Yeah.
I mean, this is like a win-win-win-win-win for everybody all the way around.
Yeah.
Unless you're just stuck in nasty negativism.
Well, and I also feel like there's one constituency we haven't really talked about, and that's the tribes. The tribes have a disproportionate amount of the rich solar and wind potential on their lands, and the railways were used as a tool of genocide.
Yes.
So we need to really face that dark history of the railroads, and I think one possibility or one possible way forward may be that this infrastructure, this tax-exempt infrastructure, actually be owned and operated by the tribes, and that those tribes be able to renegotiate right-of-way that were poorly, that cut them a bad deal early on, that they be able to export power and do energy sovereignty as well.
Yeah, and they're located also all across the country. There's lots of places, so there are nodes of potential support if people want to organize that way. So it's got a huge amount of potential. I want to lift up every possible way people can do this. So, I mean, that's one of the fun things. You get together and think about, well, geez, what about this? Oh, what about this? What about this? It's like, yeah, it all works.
I know, and I didn't know a darn thing about trains. I meet all these people everywhere I go know way more about trains than I do.
Yeah.
They have trains in their basement, in their garage, etc. Everywhere I go, these folks are passionate about trains. Trains have this thing.
Yeah.
And I'm catching the bug, and because I'm tired of always being against stuff.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to be for something that has so much promise, that is actually has a potential to build a populist coalition around what's best in people rather than what's worst in them.
Right. And I like something you said early in this hour of our conversation about our yes having to be so more compelling.
Well, I like to say that our no, all things we're against, our no is only as powerful as our yes is compelling.
Yes.
People don't want to join a movement that's just about no.
Right.
People want to be about the future.
Right.
It's don't ask what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That kind of challenge of this is something beautiful, something with great potential.
Right. Well, I want to thank you, Bill. Appreciate having you, as a guest in the program again. We've done this a couple of times before, and I'm happy to have you here again. For nearly 31 years, this TV series has addressed many serious problems, and we always end by recommending solutions. This past hour has spent some time on the problems, but almost all of the hour has been about these exciting solutions that Solutionary Rail offers. It would be good for the environment, good for our climate, good for local communities, good for several kinds of workers, rail passengers, farmers, all kinds of people, good for the public interest. I enthusiastically support Solutionary Rail. I hope you'll visit their website, www.solutionaryrail.org. You can learn more about it there, watch the video again that we saw at the beginning of the program, www.solutionaryrail.org/SR video. Share that link with your friends, spread the word, build the movement. You can also buy the book for $19.95, as I will, and spread the word. I want to just add something else about this TV series. For almost 31 years, since February of '87, I've been producing and hosting approximately 360 episodes of this TV program for the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. This program for December 2017 is the last in that decades-long series, but starting next month with January 2018, I will produce and host a similar series under a different name and with a different looking set. The format and the range of issues will remain the same as what you've been watching for the past 3 decades, and so will the dates and times when you can watch the program series on TCTV Cable Channel 22 in Thurston County. The new program series will be called Glen's Parallax Perspectives. We will post those programs also on the new blog that I will be creating by mid-December 2017 with the same name, www.parallaxperspectives.org. Look for that blog for much information about a wide range of issues related to peace, nonviolence, economics, the environment, and other vital issues. So look for the new TV series, Glen's Parallax Perspectives, starting in January 2018, and visit my new blog, www.parallaxperspectives.org, starting in mid-December of 2017. About 170 of Olympia FOR's previous programs are on our website now, and they will remain there, so you can watch them, scroll down through the sequence that's listed chronologically. Visit www.olympiafor.org, click TV programs, scroll down through the chronological list, click the title of any program that you want to watch, and click the link next to it for a Word document or a PDF document that thoroughly summarizes what we said during the interview. You can get a lot of information about a variety of issues related to peace, social justice, and nonviolence by contacting the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation at 360-491-9093. Visit www.olympiafor.org. We are all one human family. We all share one planet. We can create a better world, but we all have to work at it. And the world needs exactly what you have to offer. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.